Welcome to Pesci's Recovery Corner. This is a recovery podcast. Recovery from what? Recovery from drug addiction, from alcoholism, from mental health. We bring all different types of guests on here that are in recovery, some that work in recovery, that are professionals, that their expertise is to help people that are suffering and struggling with substance abuse or mental health or both. Today I have a very, before we get started, please, if you would be so kind, like and subscribe the channel and share it everywhere. We want to be able to get the word out to people if you are on YouTube. And then today I have a very special guest. His name is James Evans.
Thank you for having me.
Welcome to the corner.
Very grateful to be here.
I'm grateful that you came too. And we just barely met not that long ago through one of our friends, our mutual friends, Daniel Nunez, who was on here recently. We'll get into some things real quick as far as the recovery aspect. But first, let's hear about your history. Who the hell is James Evans?
So,
where were you born, raised, all that jazz?
Yeah, my name's James Evans. I was born in Anaheim, California. Early life was spent in Huntington Beach. I always like to point out and explain that I had a great upbringing, great childhood. There were things that I did struggle with underneath. But as far as like what my mother provided and how I lived, I never went without. I always had what I wanted and always had food, always was able to play sports, do everything I wanted to do. So I really did have a great upbringing. And
so the family system was solid, but what were the things underneath? Was it inadequacies? Was it insecurities? What was it?
Well, so, one thing, I was diagnosed at a young age with Tourette syndrome.
Okay.
So at the age of about 5 or 6, I was diagnosed with Tourette syndrome. And, today as an adult, it's not what it was when I was a child.
Okay.
When I was a child, it was very much completely involuntary. I would do all my tics. I would crack my knuckles and roll my ankles and do certain tics in sequences. Mm-hmm. I'd move my neck like that.
Yeah.
Crack my jaw. I still crack my jaw sometimes now.
I actually cracked my jaw for many years.
Yeah. And I even would like do this thing where I'd kick my neck back and, that was very, very difficult as a child. There were times when it would be almost like I was having a seizure for 10 to 15 minutes, but it would just be my tics just going.
Yeah.
Right. And so that was one of the elements I did struggle with as a child.
How old was that?
I'd say it was really something I struggled with from about 5 or 6 all the way till about like 13, 14.
And you struggled with it with people make fun of you?
Yes, I did learn though, once I did move from Huntington Beach to Marietta, and I've been bigger my whole life too. Yeah. And, everybody who's been lifelong friends that I've been friends with, it started with them cracking jokes. And as soon as I started cracking jokes back, everybody loved each other and we were all good. Cool. Yeah. But when I was in elementary school, in Huntington Beach, it got to me, but it took a while for that self-esteem to really build up. Mm-hmm. And, when I was around 2 years old, my mother left my biological father mm-hmm. with my sister. She basically took my sister. My sister's 9 years older than me.
Right.
And so his behavior as a drug addict really affected my sister's life. And she could see it starting to happen with me at 2. Mm-hmm. And my mom packed up her stuff and bounced, and my stepdad is my dad. I really only
He pretty much raised you.
He did, right? I only make the distinguish the two when I'm doing something like this or I'm telling my story. Mm-hmm. He's my dad. My favorite joke that he hates is I inherited all the good things from him, but not his hairline because he's got the cul-de-sac.
He's bald.
But that's a good one. That's Pops, man. I love him. And growing up, it was very much, I loved him when I loved him, but when it was time to put me in my place, you weren't my dad.
Yeah.
So it took a long time for me to get to that place where I really was able to view him for what he was. And that was like a complete angel in my life. Like if I were in his position, I would not have stayed anywhere where somebody did half the stuff I did.
You wouldn't have wanted to deal with you.
Oh, no way.
Yeah.
No. So those were just kind of some of the things that I was dealing with growing up. Mm-hmm. The Tourette's was the big hurdle. And then just the struggling, without a father or without just the wondering what happened, why is this more important, or why were drugs more important than me? And as I became a drug addict, I really started to understand that, And so, and who I am today, really from about the age of 20, 21, like all resentment there left. Mm-hmm. if I were to meet him today or see him today, we would just get to know each other, you know? But if it doesn't happen, like, I don't hold no resentment, you know, I get it.
Right. When was the first time that you ever were introduced to substances, and what were they, and how did it all go down?
So I do have memories of one stealing my mom's Mike's Hard Lemonade when I was like way younger.
Yeah.
And then my grandpa explained to me that when I was a toddler, just learning how to walk, my real dad would set a beer at one end of the coffee table and have me walk over. He'd give me a sip, and he'd set it at the other end and walk over, and he'd give me a sip. But the first time I'd say I really got loaded, I was 11 years old. There was a neighborhood friend named Arkansas. He was 2 years older, so I was in 6th grade. He was in 8th grade. He had some weed. He was like, you know, most people smoke weed for the first time and they don't get high. So we smoked a lot of it.
Yeah.
And we went inside and I raided the snack cupboard, and I sat down and I watched Corky Romano for the first time. I'd never seen that movie. And I died laughing, and I had so much fun, and I ate snacks, and I felt like I found what I had been looking for my whole life.
Right.
You know, it was that first I had arrived moment where like I found everything I was looking for. I felt a part of, I felt at peace, I felt whole, you know? And so for a very long time, because of that, all I really did was smoke weed. You know, shortly after that, I realized that weed would help with my Tourette's. I really didn't like taking my Tourette's medications. I've
actually had people with Tourette's in recovery or attempting to be in recovery tell me that it is proven, it's factual, that weed helps with Tourette's.
This is what I say to people. I have multiple things. I have a laundry list of excuses or actual medical things that weed would benefit me for sure.
Sure.
But just like my parents drank alcohol on the beach and are the reason why we can't have glass on the beach anymore, I ruined smoking weed for me.
Right.
You know, I had my privilege and I went way too far. For a long time, I was just like a manageable stoner. I might have smoked a little too much weed, but it was never really getting in the way of everything.
Did it make it go away? Did it make the Tourette's go away?
So a lot of, because it's all neurological and it's a lot of like hypertension. So for myself, it just made me feel relaxed enough to where like I wouldn't feel the need to do my tics.
Okay.
So like, it's like if you know, if you were at a professional setting or you were around people and you had an itch in your balls and you got to give it the old pinch and twist, and you're not going to do that in front of people, but a little later here, you're going to make that happen when you're not around anybody. Yeah. You know, it was it became like that for me with my tics. And that's how without weed, I live my life as an adult, right? Like I'll feel it come to the surface and me want to do my tics, but I can sit with that now and then just at a later moment do it instead of it being involuntary and just going. Right. Right. And so I just explain it as like an itch that's got to happen. And, you know, I'm not going to be sitting there with my tics going off all the time. Certain people, I don't care. A lot of times it's just happening without me noticing it, but it's not like firing off constantly like it used to. Okay. And for me today, that's plenty good enough.
I haven't even seen anything happen so far.
I'm feeling them, but I do this and it's just little things. And sometimes it just looks like fidgeting. Yeah. But for me, it's all repetitive sequences.
Sure. Yeah. Do you know who Balin Dupree is?
I do not.
You haven't seen her on TikTok? Oh, she's awesome.
Really?
I love her. I mean, I just love her. She's so open about her Tourette's, and I mean, she's a lot younger. She's got like one of the gnarliest forms of Tourette's that I've ever seen. I've seen a lot of people with Tourette's, but like she's one. There's another guy too on TikTok that I just admire.
Yeah, my wife has urged me to lean into it sometimes with certain things. So the only thing that I do that is involuntary is like, have you ever seen the clip of Joey Diaz where he's on a podcast and he goes and he sets down his coffee cup and then he thinks his coffee cup is falling?
No,
have you seen that clip? It's a
great
clip, but
you have to show
that's what happens to me, like that involuntary, like I'll think there'll be a pen in my hand and I'll think it's falling, but it's just barely moving, and a normal person would just like grab the pen, I'll launch stuff. Okay. You know, one of my greatest moments when I was in high school, my mom just got a brand new BMW. She picked me up from football practice, bought me Chinese food. She had to stop somewhere at the bank. She's like, don't eat in the car. brand new BMW. I was like, I'm not going to eat in the car. When she's in the bank, I start eating in the car. So we start driving, and I launch the Chinese food all over the dash of a brand new BMW. So I'm just, that happens sometimes. That's the only thing that happens that's involuntary. And, you know, my niece, she has Tourette's as well too. And so she's talked to me a lot, and just wondering, like, does it get better, or what, in different things like that. And that was the one thing I was like, well, I am still launching stuff at 32 years old. So it gets better, but it's never going to completely go away. And at this age, I just laugh. It's hilarious.
You've embraced it. You've accepted it.
Exactly.
So as time went on, besides the weed, what other things did you get into as far as substances into, you know, as you got into your young adulthood?
Yeah. So when I was in high school, I was a varsity athlete. I was a varsity wrestler as a freshman.
Okay.
I was a swing player my sophomore year for varsity and JV in football. And then I was varsity my junior year in football. And so as I kind of got into those years, I was still smoking weed regularly. I believed it really did help my Tourette's. So I was doing that very manageably. But as people started to party, you know, I'd start to drink. Really wasn't doing too much more than that. A little bit of cocaine here and there, but nothing crazy. My junior year in football, I got hurt. Tore my MCL and my LCL in my right leg. And the reality is I could have came back from that.
Yeah.
You know, I could have rehabbed, I could have made it happen, but in my life, it was just too much. I started taking pain meds for my knee, and I really believed that, like, everything was over because I got hurt, you know. Now that I'm older, I've seen guys come back from worse, you know? And so, but that was where, with the pain meds and the partying, you know, pain meds became ecstasy became ketamine, acid, everything. I quickly, shortly after that, dropped out of, or I didn't drop out of school. I tested out of school. So I took the California High School Proficiency Exam.
Yes.
And then just bounced and then started partying. And that was right around like the 2008 market crash. And at the time I was selling weed. You know, I was a high school athlete, you know, who was doing pretty good with my school. I always had like a 3.7 GPA. I wasn't a 4.0 kid, but I was pretty close.
Yeah.
And I couldn't get a job at McDonald's or Taco Bell. So I just thought selling weed was the answer, and then selling ecstasy was the answer. And, you know, I went on basically a pretty long run of selling drugs and partying and raving. And, you know, I was always just a little guy. I could get anything and everything, and I did my thing, but I was very much just a white boy in the suburbs who was just, you know, I was who I was for sure. I never tried to make it seem like I was some like drug kingpin or anything like that. It wasn't like that, but I definitely was selling blow and ecstasy and stuff like that. And my friend's girlfriend, her father owned a wholesale fine arts company, selling paintings and all kinds of cool stuff. And her brother had quit during a fair, so they needed somebody to do like the deliveries and restocking the booth at the San Diego Fair. And I was just like, well, whatever, I'm not really doing anything. I was like, I don't really need the money, but sure, I'll help. And after the fair, you know, his name was Jim. He was like, hey, I'd love to hire you. And he's like, I can't really afford you though. And I was like, dude, I make more money selling drugs. Like, I don't, you know, and he's a musician, and I heard him playing, and I was like, what are you doing living in Murrieta? You know? And he's always played music, but he stepped away from playing live to raise his kids. And I just liked him. I connected with him. And so I started working for him, and that job is always what kept me sensible enough to not end up in prison, end up dead. It was at least like the responsibilities I had to hold up with that kept me close enough on the right path to where I never completely derailed.
Okay.
And I worked there for a really long time.
Were you doing meth?
At the end. So I didn't touch methamphetamine until first time I went to treatment was in 2015. And then when I relapsed like 8 or 9 months later, when I relapsed then, cocaine's a lot more expensive when you're not selling it. So I went to the poor man's cocaine and started on methamphetamine, which luckily for me, nosedive. So
how long were you on it?
From March of 2016 till I got sober in August of 2016.
Okay.
Yeah. And it was a lot of back and forth. I didn't start with it right away. But yeah, it derailed me pretty quick. And I did a lot of hallucinogens. So I was already someone who, had a lot of hallucinations, lived in psychosis, and going from already being like that with your brain open to that type of stuff. Once I started doing methamphetamine, it really just like made it much worse.
You said you did the party drugs. Do you think, I mean, I did them too. And I definitely loved doing hallucinogens until I didn't, depending on what trip was good and which one turned bad.
Exactly.
But you think when you did hallucinogens or the party drugs like ecstasy and things like that, were you seeking a great escape? Were you seeking internal bliss?
So for me, for the most part, I just wanted to have fun. I just wanted to have a good time. But one thing about me that I didn't really get into from my childhood, my stepdad, he was raised Catholic. So when he came into our lives at a very early age, I was going to a Catholic church. I got baptized there, first communion, was all in for a very long time. And then probably somewhere around like 11-ish, maybe 10, 11, the idea that there is only one way to God never set right with me. And it's like, how can you tell me that someone on the other side of earth that has never heard of Jesus, who might only live for a few years, it just didn't.
I love your outlook.
Yeah, it just didn't click at a really young age.
Yeah.
So I very much
You understood that.
Yeah, but at the time, I turned straight to there is no God.
Yeah.
And
believing.
Yeah, and then when I found like reggae music and Bob Marley, that was the first thing that like I felt like there was a light coming from music and something like that,
Mm-hmm.
And so I got way into, all types of Rasta literature. Actually like I was a vegetarian for about a year and a half. Would never do that again because I just loved meat too much. But at the time, I did that for a while. And then that led to me, turning and looking to Egypt for, just different things,
spirits,
spirituality, all different kinds of things. And then it turned into India and Hindu stuff, Buddhism. I really was always like searching.
Right.
And for me, that's what the psychedelics were. It was part of that search.
Understand.
And then skipping ahead, when I did get sober, and we'll get into some of the stuff for when that, transition happened. But when I did get sober and I was living in Colorado, I was praying in Native American sweat lodges. And the first time I prayed in a lodge.
Not sober.
No, so totally sober.
Sober, okay.
Totally sober. I was praying in a lodge, and it was my first time praying in a lodge, and it was like a bell rang over my head.
Spirit.
And I was like, I found it. I'm not looking anymore. And kind of from that point on, even though I don't actively pray in lodges, I don't ever feel like I'm searching for it. It's hard to find where it's not for me now.
I understand.
Yeah.
I understand. Sometimes we just tap into something and we know
For sure.
that that's where we need to be.
100%. So I have a lot of respect and appreciation for any different path inward.
Sure.
But for me, it's like if you got to get to San Diego and the 5 is backed up, you can shoot down Ortega and then you can hop on the 15 and shoot down and do whatever you got to do. Either way, all roads lead there.
You mentioned that was that one time was your first time going to treatment. How many times did you go to treatment?
Twice.
All right. Did you stay sober after your second time of going to treatment?
Yes.
Okay. And you got sober at 24.
24. I was 23 the first time I showed up.
What was your crisis? What crisis brought you to treatment that time?
So more importantly, I think it's important to kind of go over the distinction of how it was the first time versus how it was the second time.
How was it?
So the first time I went to treatment, I was 23 years old, came out of a really bad trip at my house. I had been living with my friends we were just partying and doing our thing for a long time. And we were getting kicked out of another place. And, my homie didn't have anywhere to go. And he's just like, hey, we're just not going to party anymore. And I was like, bro, we keep saying that and we keep partying, So I was like, I can go home. And I went home and I just stayed partying the way I was, but at home. And when no one else is in the house is partying, it's real obvious that you have a problem. And so that was in June of 2015.
Yeah.
And by August of 2015, I went to rehab for the first time. So came out of a trip, not doing well, still had a bottle of whiskey. And I was going downstairs to tell my mom and my sister I need to go to rehab. And I fell down the stairs and crash landed at the bottom, and I'm crying and I'm saying I need to go to rehab.
Wow.
And I go upstairs, I pour out the bottle of whiskey. My hair was down to here, shaved my head because there was bad energy in my hair. And I just like stayed there crying. And my sister called me down and she's just like, oh, I found this outpatient. You just go there 3 times a week. And I was like, dude, you got to send me somewhere. I was like, if I go somewhere 3 days a week, like it's
Like
not
you
gonna
needed
work.
to go inpatient.
Oh yeah, bad. And so then when my sister drove me to treatment that time, she was like, you know, are you, and I still remember this like it was yesterday. It's insane. And she goes, so are you still going to drink? Or you just stopping the harder drugs? Like, where are you still going to smoke weed? And I was like, well, of course I'm still going to smoke weed. I'm not a crazy person. Like that was where I was at mentally going to treatment.
Sure.
I just needed a break
From the hard stuff.
yeah, just get me out of this rough patch. Things haven't been going my way. You know, when I get out of here, I'll have a little tune up and I'll be good. But when I was there, the layers started coming off, right?
This is the second time or the first?
First time.
First.
There was a gentleman named Jay who was, he's actually, I don't know if he still is, but he's who ran the Alpha Project in Vista. I went to Ranch Creek Recovery in Temecula.
Okay.
That's where I went both times. And he worked there as well. And he would just smoke cigarettes with me and we'd talk about God. And, you know, he followed the dead back in the day and he just had all kinds of crazy stories. He was way older and he got sober from heroin in 96. And, you know, he very much was just like, he never told me I needed to do anything, but he's like, this is how I live and this is what I do. And like the attraction rather than promotion was there.
Beautiful.
You know? And so, I just absorbed from him. And then my case manager, Corey, he represented like almost another element to my life and we just connected and, I bought into it, you know, but when I left treatment or really before we left treatment, they would only take us to a Friday night meeting. And so when I went to the Friday night meeting, I was like, dang, the chip chick's hot. And I live in Murrieta and the place is in Temecula. So of course, when I got out of treatment, I'm chasing the chip chick around and we end up dating for 6 months. And, but I still distinctly remember crying in that first meeting, sitting in the corner. I had tried to kill myself a couple times before going to treatment. Was unsuccessful, obviously. And I'm sitting there crying, and there's this attorney named Bob sitting next to me, and he's just telling me it's going to be all right. I was like, everybody's having such a good time, dude. I don't get it. Like, he's like, dude, you're going to be fine. And I felt super out of place. And this lady, Mary, shared about how when she drinks, she ends up knocking on her Coke dealer's window at 3 a.m. and climbing through and having him sell her blow when he hates her guts and won't sell to her anymore. And I'm like, yeah, I'm in the right place. But that initial intention, those reservations never really left. So, you know, I got out of there and I just tried to fix the outside. I pick and chose what worked for me and what didn't. And that's how I lived. That's how I always lived. So I just got what I always got, which was half measures, you know? And then I relapsed. I started going back and forth for a while. And then I ended up at that place in A Vision for You where you're at the jumping off point.
Yes.
You know, I was the boy whistling in the dark. Everything's great. Got a couple months under my belt.
Yeah, Ma, I don't see anything wrong with here.
Yeah. And I couldn't imagine life with or without alcohol. And I was very resentful at 12-step fellowships. But there was one specific meeting, my Tuesday night men's meeting, where I wanted what the guys in that room had. Yeah. Just not smoking meth and crack and drinking whiskey wasn't the answer yet. But that's really what I held on to. So when I went back the second time, the last time, I was completely and utterly done. You know, I knew I was at the end of the road. I knew I was out of ideas. I had to, for myself, clean the slate. Anything that I pick and chose and wanted to hold on to, I basically had to say to myself, anything that is an ideal that I have, once I do this process, if it's still there and there's still merit to it, then I'll be able to incorporate it into my life. But if it no longer serves me, I have to be willing to let it go no matter what it is, and no matter who it is. I have to be able to completely clean the slate. And when I was in treatment, my buddy who was stationed in Georgia, he was getting stationed in Colorado,
Mm-hmm.
and he was like, dude, I got a couch you can sleep on. He's like, what you're doing here ain't working for you. He's like, come live with me, dude. And I was like, all right.
So you went to Colorado.
Yeah, I went through 93 days of residential treatment. Then they're like, you need a plan. And I was like, I got a couch to sleep on. I don't need a plan. And they're like, dude, you need a plan.
This is
like,
on round 2 of treatment?
round 2. Yeah. I was at residential treatment for 93 days. And when I got to Colorado, I moved in with my buddy. I spent $100 and something of my $500 on gas to get out there. And then after I bought food for 2 days, I was like, I should probably get a job. And then I got a job, and I really didn't like the meetings. So I was like, I should probably move into somewhere where like they're going to make me go to meetings. Otherwise I'm not going to. So I was on the waiting list for 2 of the sober livings there. And then I talked to Pikes Peak Sober Living and talked with Kevin. He's a lot more soft today than he used to be. He was not a very happy guy to be talking to on the phone when you're asking about the program.
Mm-hmm.
And he's just like, we got double scrub at 7 a.m. Show up at 8, and just like click. And so I get there for a tour, and it's like, I came from I was in like a California cushy, nice rehab, and I go on a tour of this place, and I love that sober living. It saved my life.
Nice.
But it was not a California sober living. Like I hear guys complain about their sober livings, and I go do step work with them at their sober livings, and I'm like, dude, you are living in like heaven. Yeah. And 16 dudes in a house. You start in a 6-man room. There's 3 bunks. As dudes leave, you move down. It was more structured and set up like a halfway house. We would get guys from like jail and stuff, and it was set up to a certain standard so they could get the vouchers, which really wasn't that big of a standard. Go to a meeting every day, do your chore, be home by curfew, don't drink, don't drug. It's not that big of a standard.
How long did you stay there?
I stayed there for 1 year to the day.
How far into your recovery? Because I know that this round 2 of treatment, you made a decision that I got to do this all the way.
Mm-hmm.
How far into your recovery do you think that you were to where you realized, like, I'm going to be staying sober one day at a time for the rest of my life?
Honestly, pretty much right away.
I like that. So before you even worked any kind of 12-step program or nothing like that, like psychic change had already taken place?
So for me, when I went to treatment, I knew the things I didn't want to talk about in treatment the first time were the things that got me loaded. Mm-hmm. So for 3 months in treatment,
you spoke about it this time.
Anything and everything.
You opened
when
up
I
completely.
did a 4th and 5th step, it was like not even a big deal. Mm-hmm. The only big revelation I had with the 4th step is I was like, hell yeah, I'm going to write about all the people that I hate. I got these resentments at, F them. I hit a roadblock, and then I started doing resentments towards myself. Mm-hmm. And then it's like, boom. Yeah, I got a lot of resentments, but I don't have 3 pages of resentments towards anybody other than me. So it's like
you're your own worst enemy.
I walked around thinking I was mad at the world, and I was just mad at myself.
Okay, so then, because you got sober at 24, which is a huge deal for the youngsters.
For sure.
For youngsters to get sober and actually make that decision, like, I'm doing this all the way. Throughout this time, how long are you sober right now? You're coming up on 8?
8 years next month.
Already?
Yeah.
Wow.
So 7, a solid 7.
Solid 7. You never had the desire over these last many years to ever smoke some weed or have a drink?
I've had the thought multiple times, but that thought has never triggered an urge or a plan
or a craving or a plan or
anything. Good. Right? It's been from I walked into treatment that last time with my hands up doing the Rocky thing. Yeah. I was like so done. Mm-hmm. And from that moment on, the obsession was lifted.
It sounds like you're here to stay.
Yeah, there were plenty, and I'm not impervious to this. I still got to do what I got to do to live in that. Sure.
Listen, I'm gonna tell you this right now. I own sober livings. Yeah. Right? So everything that you just described, as far as like the structure of how that whole house is built and everything, I live by that. I love that
for sure.
Whoever that guy is, I don't know who he is.
He's a rock star.
He sounds like he's a rock star.
Him and his wife saved my life.
I love that, and more and more people that get into the path of recovery that don't go to sober living actually really do need it, and they could definitely gain and benefit from getting super solid structure and a 1 year. Staying in sober living in an environment like that is great, because then you get to go have a big life without fucking it all up later on again, because you don't actually have recovery under your belt. The houses that I have, I always say, like, listen, you guys, Dream big, right? Dream extravagant. That's fine. But just know, if you don't get this recovery before you get anything else, everything else will tank. You will lose it all. So
For sure.
make sure that your recovery becomes your number one thing. Because if you're practicing these principles in all of your affairs, and if you're truly talking the talk and walking the walk, you will be able to follow those big dreams that I say dream big about, and then some, like more than what you ever desired. So I commend you for being such a young man. You're still young to me. I mean, even at 32. You're still 21 years younger than me. But at 24, I wouldn't have even thought of it. There was no way. Like, there was nothing that happened yet to where the idea of, like, maybe you should get sober. It didn't even cross my mind until, like, my later 20s.
I had multiple older guys at that house just be like, what are you doing here?
Yeah.
And they're like 60 getting sober, or mid 50s getting sober. And they're like, how are you thinking like this at that age? Like, why are you here?
Good. Well, you saved yourself a lifetime of fucking up.
For sure. Well, I mean, I can do that sober.
Yeah.
But I quickly became manager there, and I ran the place, you know? And so, and a lot of guys were just like, what are you doing? You know, why are you living here? And it's like, cause I gotta be, you know? And I almost didn't move into that house. You know, I was just very much like, they were doing double scrub. The manager at the time was a little goofy. I was like, I don't know. And I was leaving, and in my mind, I wasn't moving in. And there were two dudes I smoked a cigarette with, Dominic and Patrick. And they had me laughing so hard, and I was in a new state, and I didn't know anybody really in recovery. I was like, screw it, I'll live with you guys. And when I moved in, because that bed opened up, it was the day after Super Bowl Sunday. And I still have his big book, Xavier Dossett. He went and he partied and he drank at a Super Bowl party, and instead of going to detox, he bolted and went on a run, ended up getting in a shooting at a 7-Eleven, straight to prison. That's whose bet I got.
Wow.
Dominic is dead. That guy we'd go to meetings together. We were like this all the time. Plenty of dudes in there with prison sentences, straight to prison. Plenty of dudes went on other runs. The guy who was on the bunk, you start at the top bunk. The guy who was under me, his name was Jason. Yeah. We both had sales jobs. He sold like a reading course. I was selling security systems. We'd wake up every morning. We'd do like our morning AA thing, and we'd crack jokes. He'd go teach little Timmy how to read. I'd go make sure these housewives could feel safe in their own home. He bolted one night, and, you know, a couple months later, he shot up and he OD'd, you know? And so there's a lot of people who aren't there.
So let's get to that. You have this podcast. How old's your podcast?
I started in February.
It is called
No More Dead Friends.
No More Dead Friends. In the time that you've been sober, did you have a lot of friends that got sober that came on this path but then ended up relapsing and overdosing and dying?
So a couple, yeah. Most of my friends that I've lost through either drug overdoses or drunk driving accidents or anything else that comes in our realm of problems never even got to recovery. When I moved to Murrieta in fifth grade, you know, on my birthday in fifth grade, I met who became my best friend for a very long time, Kyle Murphy. We met on our birthdays. We shared our birthday. We celebrated our birthday for years. We became really good friends. Really just grew up together. We started using drugs together. Same with our buddy Daniel, who's no longer with us. Daniel passed away first. There were other friends who passed away before that, but I have a tattoo for Daniel right there on my finger, and I have a tattoo on the back of my neck for Kyle, and I put it on the back of my neck because I don't ever want to see it. I just know I have it. Yeah. You know, me and Kyle were super close, and we'd always talk on our birthday, and I helped get him into treatment multiple times. And then in 2020, his wife always knew she could call me and I could find him when he was on a run or whatever. And, you know, she called me and he was not answering his phone. And there was this mountain that we used to hang out on when we were little kids, right? And smoke weed up there. And I'm driving around thinking he's on the mountain, and I'm like, oh no, he's not here. And I was leaving the neighborhood a different way that I came in, and I saw his truck like way down there, and I was like, oh yeah, he's on the mountain. So I went back over there and I walked up this mountain and I found him all knotted out and stuff, and brought him back to his house, and me and his dad flushed all his drugs and stuff, and we got him to rehab one last time. And that was right before COVID in 2020. And at that time I'd moved down to San Diego. He was in treatment at Solution Based in Murrieta, doing great. Few months passed by, and, you know, he relapsed one more time and passed away. You know, his mom called me one Friday morning. That was right as I had started working in treatment. Friday morning, I did the art group at Restore at the time before I moved into the role that I'm in now. And I just cried like a baby all morning. And then I was just like, it's time to go run group, and I just rolled in and ran group and sat with people and got out of myself and, did the deal, and
Did what we needed to do.
Yeah, for sure. And that was one that messed me up. That was the death. There was a lot of death around it. There's so many other people that I love and I appreciate that I could talk for hours about. But that was the one that hit me the hardest. And really, like, the 5 or 6 deaths after him were tough, but I became very like cold with it and
Desensitized in a sense.
desensitized. Yeah. But 3 weeks ago, my buddy Corey, who we also grew up with, he was also one of the other ones he went to treatment, and I hadn't talked with Corey. I've seen him once since I got sober. So he was something I was really close with when I was younger, and I wasn't so close with now. And I just found out, I didn't even know he was struggling, just found out he went to treatment and he was doing Celebrate Recovery. He was on his own path and he used one last time. And this was in my opinion, like, it was of course it hurt, but it was the first time I've been able to sit there at a funeral and feel it and just cry. And it was very healing. It was finally the one where it's like, I'm still going to do what I'm going to do. And I'm still going to keep, I have to stay on my path, but it was finally the first one where I could like just feel it and go through the process instead of just like gripping and trying to push it down or whatever.
I have a question for you. So the people who actually do come into the path of recovery and get a flavor of recovery or have actually stayed sober for a period of time or maybe gone to countless treatment centers or gone to 12-step meetings or whatever kind of meetings, the ones that go back out and test the waters and end up passing away, whether it's an overdose or drinking themselves to death or some kind of fluke accident that may have happened from drinking or whatever, using, what do you think it is within them that takes them out of this world, and how can that be prevented?
It's so hard to say because I think it's really different for all of us. We're all on our own internal journey. I know for me, when I went back out and tested the waters, I just wasn't done yet. I don't know if it's that simple for them. I do know some people who come in and they do the deal and they seem like they're doing everything, but there's other mental health issues there. They need some extra outside help.
Do you think they had a standing chance or chances or things?
Everybody has a chance.
That's right.
Nobody doesn't have a chance.
Do you think messages were carried to the people that were actually in recovery to where they knew what they needed to do, but they chose to do differently?
For sure. I think for the most part, and within some with some exclusions, for the most part, we all know what we need to do.
Mm-hmm. So the human ego can become the greatest enemy.
For sure.
And we will give more power to that, which then takes you right out of the game, because I have seen countless lives be lost, and it could have been prevented, not by us to them, because if we're already carrying the message or being beacons of recovery that are there to be the example for them, but they choose differently, it's they themselves that are their own worst enemies that end up making that one mistake that just takes them out of the game.
For sure. And I think too, for some people, it could be as simple as just like, sometimes it's like, dude, this is lame. Like, they're just not bought in yet. Like, yeah, I know this is what I should do, but this is like, they could be wrapped up in it could be something as simple as just thinking it's dumb, dude. Like, I ain't trying to do that. Like, let me just do what I've always, and it's not, sometimes I don't think it ever is anything more than that.
And but also, more often than none, it could be very psychological too. That
100%.
Some people do not want to identify certain underlying stuff that they are holding on to. Some people want to still take things to the grave with them rather than share it with somebody or put it 100%. Out on the table. Some people don't really have anything outside of themselves as a higher power that they rely on. So they rely on their own thinking, which then will take them into that direction. So it could be a number of different things.
So many. So I think it's definitely something that you can't really pinpoint. Mm-hmm. It's going to be different from individual to individual for sure.
Sure. Well, this has been a great conversation. You're so well spoken. I admire the youth, the youngsters that come in and get sober and stay sober. But that's obviously when they do the work, like they aren't in relapse mode years later. Because I've seen plenty of people get sober young, and then they stick around. I've seen them stay for 4, 5, 6, 7 years. Then all of a sudden, right out the window. And sometimes it's not automatic. Sometimes they're not going to die right away. Sometimes they're just using and drinking. They were former heroin addicts and nothing's happened.
I have some friends like that.
I've got a lot of friends
and they're
like
fine.
that. And they're fine. So to each their own, obviously, but I do admire you for doing what you do, being who you are, and please keep being an example. I know that you're involved in young persons recovery circles, which is amazing too.
For sure.
If people were to try to find you, how could they find you?
The No More Dead Friends podcast is basically anywhere you can get podcasts, Spotify, Apple, all the other ones. Instagram would be No More Dead Friends 24.
Okay, great. And before we sign off, if you would be so kind as to put some positive energy into the universe for anybody and everybody that might be watching and listening, what would you say to somebody that's struggling of any age, race, creed, color, doesn't matter?
Yeah, if you're struggling with drugs and alcohol, there is a way out. We can show you the way. There's going to be a lot of people who along the way are going to be there to help you. There's going to be a lot of God shots. But at the end of the day, you're going to be the one who has to trudge the path. You're going to have to trust the process. If you're like me, it's going to get worse before it gets better. And sometimes you're going to see it get better right away for people around you, and you're not going to understand why that's like that. But if you stick to it and you make it the most important thing in your life and you fight for it like you're a drowning person trying to grasp air, there's no way you're not going to be successful.
Thank you so much. And again, this has been another episode of Pej's Recovery Corner. I am Pej. You can find this in any, just like your podcast, in any platform that has podcasts. And if you're on YouTube, please remember to subscribe and like on Pej Interventions. I am Pej, the interventionist. And until we meet again, love you all. Thank you. Signing out.